Could Oregon try to repeat what we saw from Michigan in 2023 and Ohio State in 2024 in the 2026 season? Now, this has been a common thing that teams have tried to do ever since Michigan did it in 2023. Ohio State saw how it worked for Michigan. They tried to replicate it. They did. They won a national championship. And then Penn State this year tried to replicate it, and they ended up firing their coach, what was it, 6 games into the season. So it's not a proven formula that's going to for sure work, but bringing back many of your NFL caliber type of players who might be drafted fairly high and bringing them back to play next season is a strategy that in college football would work very well, obviously with, just talent alone, but also with the way the game is going, with how imperative it is for you to have young, proven, or young, older, proven veterans who can come out and play very well for you. This Oregon team this year, very talented, extremely talented team, but they just had a lot of young players on it. And so the thought process here is if Oregon can bring back some of their more veteran players who still have eligibility remaining to come back next season, it would be huge for them to make that happen. Obviously, some of the players that Oregon might look at with doing that with Mateo Uyunglele, the other edge rusher Tatum there, the tight end Kenyon Sadiq, the safety they just brought in Dylan Thienemann, Dante Moore, and then obviously the man in the middle, Amari Washington there, just an absolute freak in the middle of that defensive line. You bring back three of these defensive linemen, and this defensive line that was very good this season could come back and be even I wouldn't say even better, maybe even better. We'll see. They would develop, so hopefully they would be better. But these are kind of the guys that I'm looking the most at to see if they come back next season. Obviously, they can still lose guys. Like, it's not like they're not going to lose anybody or anything, but it is a pretty big ask to bring Dante Moore back. However, Dante Moore really seems like the type of guy who really cares about Oregon. I know he's a transfer in, and that's what everybody's going to say, but really does seem to care a lot about Oregon and wants to see this Oregon program succeed and maybe bring them to the highest top of the mountain, which is win that national championship. He is projected to be a top 5 pick, the number 2 quarterback off the board behind Fernando Mendoza, but that playoff game against Indiana might not have given everybody the most hope in the world. And so there is a possibility that his draft stock could have, been hit by that a little bit, held on the ball to a little bit too much, had some sacks and, just didn't look comfortable back there reading the Indiana defense. No quarterback really has looked comfortable back there this season. But, that's the benefit Fernando Mendoza gets of playing on their team. Nobody scouts him in practice for the NFL draft. They just scout in the games, and he's never facing that defense. So anyway, that's my lame attempt at a joke. Anyway, so if Oregon could somehow bring back Dante Moore next year, that would probably be the first piece of this puzzle to me. I think the other guys are actually, I wouldn't say likely, but more possible. Dante Moore, everything the numbers say wise, almost for sure first round pick. I don't see how he wouldn't be a first round pick, but you never know with the NFL draft and how crazy things can be. Pretty much a for sure first round pick to be able to come there and do that. That would be huge for them to be able to get if they were able to bring back, like I said, the defensive line, other guys like that. And also this kind of goes into what Oregon is going to do with the quarterback and the transfer portal as well. We've kind of been getting some mystery of what is Oregon going to do. I think early on, many people thought Sam Levitt, the Oregon native, would go back to Oregon and play for them there, but it's not really worked out that way. He came in for a visit, but there's not been a whole lot of smoke around that. And honestly, the most smoke we had there for a while was around Husan Longstreet of USC. There possibly being the guy who comes in for Oregon and maybe going to be the guy. And Zach and I talked about that. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. But you thought, okay, maybe they just really believe in this kid. They recruited him. He was high in his recruitment. Maybe they just really believe in this kid. But now we're getting word from On3 and 24/7 that Dylan Raiola is visiting out there at Oregon. So that could be very interesting to see that kind of thing happen with Dylan Raiola possibly going to Oregon. And some of the thoughts that are out there is that if Dylan Raiola goes to Oregon, he could kind of do what what Dante Moore, not Dylan, what Dante Moore did behind Dylan Gabriel, would be to come in, sit for a year, learn the offense, kind of get ingratiated in the entire thing, and then the year after that, that's when you come in and start. Now, that would only be one season for Dylan Raiola unless he redshirts next year, which I think if he's your backup quarterback, you're probably not redshirting him. You probably trust him to be that guy, especially if something happens with somebody getting hurt, God forbid, but that's always a possibility to happen. So if you bring in Dylan Raiola, that could possibly be it. And then Dylan Raiola, he does have enough starting experience that you could bring him in and have him start for Oregon next year as well. Even if Dante Moore did go, you still have a possibility there with a quarterback who has a lot of experience and played a lot of football. He's been starting ever since he was a freshman. This would be his third year starting to come in there and play well for Oregon, possibly. He would need to work on a couple of things, but I also wonder how much development was he truly getting there at Nebraska in some ways, and not necessarily against Nebraska to say that they weren't developing him, but maybe just the way the things that were going there, kind of felt like Dylan was getting a lot of what he wanted there at Nebraska. And I think Dan Lanning is the type of guy who's not just going to give Dylan everything he wants. There's a thought process that if Dylan goes to Oregon, that his brother Dayton Raiola would go there as well. Dayton is not regarded as the 5-star type of quarterback that Dylan has been, but he's definitely somebody that could come in and compete for a spot to possibly start there at Oregon at some point. He'd have to bet on himself a little bit, as Oregon does like to bring in a lot of the transfer portal quarterbacks, but you never know. We'll see what happens. And so there's that thought. The other thought is that the guy that looks like the most likely to leave, just for me on the outside looking in, maybe you disagree with me if you're an Oregon fan. Let me know in the chat, well, not the chat, in the comment section what your thoughts are. But Dylan Thienemann probably looks like the most likely guy to leave after out of that group that I told you about. Dante Moore seems like he would be the most likely, but I think Dante Moore really cares, and I don't think that last game ended for him the way he wanted it to end, and I don't know if he got the best draft evaluation coming off of that as well too. So that could impact things. But the guy that seems like he's the most likely to leave, just because he just transferred in this year, he wasn't somebody that didn't care, obviously, but you just didn't hear a ton from him about his heart for the team and everything else. And I'm not saying he didn't have a heart for the team. Please don't hear me saying that. I'm just saying that one of the guys that you kind of could sense that from a little bit is Dylan Thienemann. Just came in, just transferred in this season. He was trying to play for a national championship, trying to improve his draft stock, as that wasn't going to happen for him there at Purdue, and he succeeded in that. And Dylan Thienemann will most likely be drafted, on probably day 2, I would say, maybe day 4 or day 3 if things don't work out for him, but probably day 2 is what I would think there. And so if Dylan Thienemann is just ready for the NFL, he could go. But also too, if he wants to keep improving his draft stock and says, no, I want to be a for sure second round pick or something like that, then maybe he would come back and do that too. Kind of just depends on the draft evaluation grade that they get there as well. So if Dylan Thienemann does leave, that's when you bring in the guy who is actually on a visit right now at Oregon. That is the other stuff that's coming out with Dylan Raiola is Koi Perich. Now the competition right now is pretty much between Koi Perich is pretty much between Texas Tech and Oregon. So I don't think this would be a situation where Oregon would have very much time. Maybe Koi Perich is patient. Maybe he's willing to be patient. I do think that Texas Tech would probably be willing to be patient with him, because he is just that kind of talent. You don't want to move on from a guy like this, but Koi Perich coming in for Dylan Thienemann would be a good kind of switch up there for them, as Koi Perich is a very good safety, has some ability to play both sides of the ball. Maybe Oregon entices him with saying, hey, we're going to bring you here, you're going to play both sides of the ball. Oregon's been looking at some wide receivers in the transfer portal. Maybe you bring in Koi Perich and he's somebody you utilize there on the offense side of the ball. Who knows? We'll see what happens, but it's all very, very interesting at this point.